So I really like this like underlying theme I've seen in a lot of these sermons, and I'm going to actually relate a lot to my island brother over there. So I wanted to talk about like waiting and just like misunderstanding and like what happens when we don't understand exactly what's going on. It's like waiting sucks. You know, like it's a time of confusion, despair, brokenness, guilt. Like you don't know what's going on. It's just bleak and stark. And that's just like waiting in the line to get to Starbucks. Like it's just like a hard time, right? Waiting is a normal tradition at every DMV, grocery store, you know, theme park, restaurant. We wait like during our work hours. Sometimes we wait through church services. It defines who we are. It defines our character of what kind of person are we when we wait. We wait for healing, financial abundance, fulfillment, emotional well-being. We wait for marriage. We wait for just like this sense of home, like a sense of belonging. We wait for all of these things. It all boils down to waiting for peace. But we can't seem to just like drag through that seemingly unending void of waiting. So we hold on to past victories. We look back to that moment where it seemed like we had our life together. Or we look like to the future where we think, oh, then my life will be together. But we forget to look in the moment. We forget to see what God is doing right now in this moment. We look back to happier days. We forget to find joy in what God is doing in our lives. The road to heaven is long, and it's filled with just like troubles. And it's imminent to this time. The road to heaven is like right now. What if we believe that our fulfillment and peace could be discovered through just accepting His presence right now? What if we quieted ourselves enough to embrace the company of Christ through our suffering? What if we chose not to waste the lesson of faithful love through our pain? Once again, I'm referring to the story of Joseph. It begins in Genesis 37, verse 3. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he was the son of his old age. And he made him a robe of many colors. But when his brothers saw that his father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. Now Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Hear this dream that I have dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field. My sheaf arose and stood upright, and behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed to mine." His brothers said to him, "Are you indeed to reign over us? Are you indeed to rule over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. He was the favorite son of his father. Then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, "I dreamed another dream. The sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me." But when he told his father and his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, "What is this dream that you dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you?" And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the same in mind. See, Joseph grew up. He knew that God had a purpose for his life. He knew that there was a specific dream of what he was going to accomplish in his future. Growing up in his household as a favorite son of father, it was easy to see how that could be accomplished. Because Israel, he was Israel, Jacob was Israel, and he was important in the land. So it was easy to see how Joseph would come to like this rulership position. So he was looking forward, he was anxious for this time that he had. While he received favor at home, his story gets quite confusing as the chapter goes on, and we see that Joseph's brothers sold him to the Ishmaelites, foreigners, to be a slave. In verse 2 of chapter 39, the Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, and he was in the house of the Egyptian master. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him, and he made him overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that he had. From the time that he made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in house and field. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge. And because of him, he had no concern about anything but the food he ate. So this man that Joseph was to work for, had no concern because Joseph was so good at what he did that he didn't have to worry about anything else. Joseph suddenly finds himself in a position of rulership and authority over an important household. So once again, it's clear to see that God placed him in a position of rulership. This was the moment that he was waiting for. So he thought that he already went through this trial of being sold. He thought that he was already done, like the pit was there, and now he had finally arrived to this position that God had told him about earlier. But as we see the story unfold, he once again comes into difficulty. After waiting in the pit of betrayal that his brothers so kindly bestowed on him, he was coming out on the other side. If the story stopped right there, our world would probably be different. If the story stopped right there, he might be satisfied with what God had told him. He wouldn't go searching for any more, but we know that sometimes things happen that we aren't expecting. The worst situation of his life was upon him later. Joseph's master Potiphar and all the men in the house were gone. Potiphar's wife was incredibly attracted to Joseph. Joseph ran from Potiphar's wife as she attempted to sleep with him. She lied about his intentions towards her. She accused him wrongly, and he ran from that temptation. So he did everything right. But it's just funny how bad things happen to good people, right? It makes me wonder how this could happen. Joseph, who had done nothing wrong, was helpless and alone. He was thrown into this tragic pit again. What could be going through his mind when he was in prison for a crime he didn't commit? I wanted to take a sidebar here. Joseph did not belong in that pit. He was not created for that pit. He was, as a lifelong inhabitant of a foreign prison, or shame that was bestowed on him wrongly. That wasn't his identity. It was not his permanent residence. It wasn't a place created for him, but it was a place that his legacy began. In that pit, he positioned his mindset to receive and freely give love and wisdom. And that's kind of the point of the pit. It's not where we're supposed to make our home, but it's where we become a place to go home. He could have gotten mad at himself for even believing God's promises in the first place. Like, how many times happens when something bad happens and then you just feel foolish because you actually believe that something was going to happen that God had designed? You get mad because you trusted in something that failed. You think that you were wrong, and then you feel shamed. I imagine this ongoing dialogue of fear and faith going on in Joseph's head. Like, one moment, he just feels so broken and just frustrated, and then the next moment, he's angry at himself for feeling frustrated. So it's like this ongoing cycle of just a downward cycle of aggression and bitterness. He could have kept going down that cycle. So he would recount every sin he's committed that he believes might disqualify him from God. He lists off everything right that he's done that might counteract that sin. But we know that that's not in the Bible. So it leads me to believe that there was something different in Joseph's life that stopped that cycle. He could have said things like, I don't deserve this. I suffer greater than anyone I know. There must be something in my life that God doesn't like. I misunderstood God. God doesn't love me anymore. I'm alone. I don't care. I give up. That didn't happen. There was something else that happened. Joseph's time in imprisonment is found in Genesis 39. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love, gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. So once again, Joseph comes into this position of authority and favor. How does this keep happening, that God is always with him? The Lord made it succeed. He became productive with all that he had, even though he didn't even own anything. I like to liken him to MacGyver, how he would like disarm bombs with just like a paper clip and a cup lid. Like, Joseph was the man. Like, he knew what he had, he used it. He knew that God gave this ability of dreams and interpretation. Only this time, it was his constant favor of God in Joseph's life that he once again moved on. He made his way up to Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, who knew about Joseph's dream interpretation. And he asked him about this dream. 7 years of famine across the land of Egypt was what Joseph predicted to Pharaoh. Pharaoh was so impressed by Joseph's ability, he once again put him in authority, even higher than that of a prison. He was second in command over Egypt. He changed the destiny of a nation. Throughout the narrative of his life, Joseph goes through this roller coaster of ups and downs as he becomes promoted, betrayed. But we can positively see this theme of God's presence being invested in his life. Time and again, he intakes this wonderful truth that God is bestowing in him. Joseph experienced favor because he trusted God with total openness, even though there was all this tragedy going on around him. He listened to God, who was experientially with him. So he experienced him in ways that was so personal and relevant to his life, and he hung on to that. He saved his family from death and starvation because of his openness to God. See, the hard part about waiting is that we're not really quite sure when it's going to end. Like, we can never see the other end of the waiting process. So for us, from our perspective, we don't even know if it's going to end. Mm-hmm. During this unforeseen, inexplicable amount of what we would call lost time, we are filled with an abundance of questions that just never seem to get answered. Questions of why this is happening, why a good God would allow this happen, to this painful moment to endure. If God is truly as faithful as he says he is, or if God even exists at all. We're not sure of the benefit of our pain. We're not sure why this would be possibly good for us. And then, of course, like, this well-meaning person comes along and tries to give us advice, and somehow just makes it even more confusing and terrible. And then we just begin thanking God for his perfect timing when we realize how foolish it was that we were throwing a tantrum during our waiting season. Waiting means a lack of answers, but maybe it's because we're asking the wrong kinds of questions. Or maybe it's because we don't need an answer at that moment. About a year ago, a friend of mine recently released an album in Nashville. She's like 25 years old. She just began her amazing career. And then 3 months after that, she was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma cancer. Of course, this news was devastating. She was one of my close friends as an undergrad student. She was my mentor. And you never really expect that kind of thing to happen. But as I'm watching her go through her treatments and all this story of her healing, I'm incredibly in awe of what God is doing in her life, even though she's in this terrible waiting season to get better. She recently posted a blog about some of her thoughts, and in it she says, "A common misconception about waiting is that it is inevitably supposed to ease the suffering or waiting of somebody else." So it's like people come up and they say, "You're going through this right now so that you can help someone else when they go through the same thing." What if some painful victories are meant to be experienced for the individual alone? When it's not your pain, it's easy to see how God could use it, also known as how to sell your story to society and really make something of it. I've heard that a lot through this experience. At the start, I was told how great of a book this will make, how many songs I'll write. It was meant as good encouragement, I'm sure. It implies the only way for suffering to be for my good is if everyone else can benefit from it. People accidentally frame things around my own life, even in someone else's pain. There's this feeling of obligation to make sense of someone's pain when we're uncomfortable with their reality. Perhaps we should be quick to give love in silence and solidarity, leaving all reasoning and rationalization behind, accepting the mystery of God. I reserve the right to stay quiet, to keep the lessons I've learned, and write a song, and maybe even not share it. At first, you may be tempted to accuse me of selfishness. I've considered that as well, but I see it as something else. There's nothing wrong with covering what has been transformed in hard times. Also, there's nothing wrong with having nothing to show for your trials. When walking with Jesus, he makes all things work together for the good, seen or unseen. I'm still processing through this, but this note is to say to myself and you don't need to sell your thoughts. Keep close to the presence and reveal only what God himself chooses to unveil in you. This is relationship. Basically, in a nutshell of what I received from that is that we can be okay with simply accepting God through our hard times, regardless of whether we see this ultimate benefit for our pain. We can be okay to trust that there's always a great, good Father on the other end who is constantly with us through the hard waiting seasons. I think the best kind of wisdom to receive through waiting can only be accounted between you and God. No one else can put their interpretation on what you've experienced. So you listen to what other people have to say. You listen to their testimony of what God's proven in their lives. You build on that, and you work through what God has shown you. Be assured that God is a big picture God. He has like this amazing painting, and he's also very clear about the details of what happens in your life. He sees perfectly the fulfillment of every promise. It's God, it's Christ, the lover of our journey, who makes way for our hearts to be present with him in the midst of the most confusing times. We can embrace our Father through the most difficult seasons of life because we've been betrayed, accused, wounded, discredited, or forgotten. And we can choose not to waste the pain of our current suffering. So, God, I pray that we wouldn't waste the pain. God, that we would embrace what you're showing us in this season, and that we would be okay with what you're doing. God, that we would trust with open hearts and expectation that you are a good God, and that there's this wonderful revelation that you will never leave us or forsake us. In Jesus' name.